Hello everyone, I'm Ben Contreras, and welcome back to another episode of Ben Talks About. Now, I'm not quite sure if I brought this topic up in a previous video, but if I were to name one video game franchise that I've just gotten this sudden interest in to play close to every game in the series, that game series would definitely be Capcom's own Resident Evil series. Now, I've been very familiar with this game series for a while now, but at first the only games that I were actually able to play, not counting ones that I played on the emulator, was the Xbox 360 version of Resident Evil 6. And while my opinion on the game might be different compared to a lot of others' opinions on the game, I can definitely say that it's not necessarily a good representation of what Resident Evil is. Now, most recently the series has gotten a sort of resurrection, from not necessarily resurrected from the dead, because the series has always been relevant for, since it started, but with the release of games such as Resident Evil 7, which brought the series back to its survival horror roots, I feel like there's been more interest in that sort of survival aspect of the series, and this all really captivated Resident Evil during that era with the announcement of a remake of what is possibly the most popular game in the entire series, that being Resident Evil 2, which was then eventually released. Everyone played it, everyone loved it, and eventually Resident Evil 3 got an announcement later on. But this is of course a video sharing my personal opinions on the game itself, as I finally have myself a PS4 and I'm able to make videos on games for it, and this is definitely one of the ones that I've been most curious about since I, heard some very good things about it. Now, I had actually had this game for a while, but I didn't really want to. I was originally going to make this a sort of first impressions video, but I feel like this is the kind of game that you can't really express a huge amount of opinion on your first go. I definitely feel like it's one of those games that has to be played from start to finish to get a complete grasp on the game itself. And after playing it and beating it, I can definitely say that this is probably one of the first times where an actual horror game has actually made me scared while playing it. Now, the story itself is, well, it's a little bit hard to explain, because it's sort of a difficult. I'm not quite sure if I would say it's really a difficult game to really get invested in without playing like the original games. I mean, I personally already knew the context of what was going on, because I've seen so many videos talking about the history of the series in general, but in terms of the story all on its own, it basically it centers around just the perspective of these two characters right here, that being Leon S. Kennedy, one of the most popular characters in the series, and pretty much becomes the more or less the de facto male mascot for the series at this point. And then we also got Claire Redfield, who is the sister of the character Chris Redfield, who was one of the main characters in the first Resident Evil game. And these two people right here are pretty much stuck in this city right here that's being set on fire, that being Raccoon City, which is being infected by this virus that basically turns everything inside the city into basically zombies, ranging from stuff like humans to dogs, and eventually later on in the game you'd fight some quite otherworldly type of creatures. Now, they're basically what they're trying to do is that they're trying to get out of there, and they basically do this by solving puzzles, trying to escape zombies, and all that kind of stuff that you would normally see in a survival horror game. Now, the main thing about this game that I feel like it makes it really unique especially compared to the much newer Resident Evil games, as I said before, this one goes back to its more survival horror roots, where it's more about avoiding combat as much as possible and saving all of the important items, from like healing items to ammos for your weapons, all the different upgrades to the weapons. You definitely want to make sure that you are careful with the resources that you get, because you do have very limited resources, and these type of items don't respawn after a while. So once you get something, or once you lose something, or once you drop something, it's basically it's gone forever, and there's no way for you to get it again, which in a way, I can kind of see how that can be seen as sort of unfair, especially for a first-time player. After all, if you go through everything and you get to a point where you no longer have any item pickups, wouldn't that technically mean that it's basically a dead game and you have to restart it all over again? I can sort of understand why someone would sort of make that kind of argument, but I feel like that sort of encourages you to, I guess, play it in a way that you won't have to worry about that. And again, that's pretty much going to be on your first playthrough. I mean, I played through the game for the first time, and I was able to beat it quite easily, and only had to look up a walkthrough for like one or two puzzles possibly. And speaking of the puzzles, some of those can be rather confusing to solve, especially when it involves getting two specific items and putting them in a specific area to open a door. It basically dwells down to you, running, to one side of the map, grabbing something, then possibly going back all the way to the other side of the map in order to get the other item. But there is enough stuff happening in the game to really not make that much of an issue, because it's not necessarily like, you're going through these like empty like corridors. There's always going to be like something happening, and the game, I think, is atmospheric enough to not really make that much of a worry. And one of those sort of obstacles that you have to go past is the character known as Mr. X. And if you've played this game, you know the type of character or obstacle that they are. What they essentially are is this this prototype creature from a series of creatures that the main villains of the game, the Umbrella Corporation, has been making based on their these characters called tyrants, which essentially serve as the close to final boss in almost each of the main traditional Resident Evil titles. And this one in particular is sent over to Raccoon City to kill any sort of survivors, and by survivors, they basically mean you, the player. And whenever you encounter them, your best bet is to simply run away, because not only are they basically immune to every single weapon that you have in your entire arsenal, even if you do eventually knock them down, that's all you do. You just knock them down and they'll eventually get back up. And not only that, but they can also pretty much kill you in almost about 3 or 4 hits, I want to say. So yeah, he is basically the main reason as to why the game can make you feel very tense, because especially considering this is a PS4 game, and they're able to take advantage of a lot of system hardware. You're able to hear like his booming footsteps all the way in an entirely separate room, and then you stay there and you think to yourself, is he gonna show up? Are his footsteps getting quieter? Are they getting louder? And then you enter, and then you like go up a flight of stairs, and then they just appear on those stairs, and then your next objective is to get away from him. But of course there are a certain amount of limitations to him. Like there are times where he can't enter very specific rooms, specifically ones that are considered like save rooms. Ones where you're allowed to like save your game and like get rid of any items that you don't need, and it's supposed to be a area that basically gives you room to breathe in a way, to get a grip on what's going on around you and all that stuff. But again, especially at the beginning of the game when you first encounter him, he can be quite the intimidating character, which he makes like a majority of the game fun in a way, because you have this creature right here that's constantly like on your tail, and he never stops like hunting you for any sort of reason, unless it's like in a scripted area where he doesn't appear in. But it's kind of hard to explain, but he's a very intimidating character, and he makes the game even more fun to play. It's one of those situations where the intensity makes it fun. and yeah, I feel like as a horror game, as a person who's not really that into horror related stuff, like horror movies, horror games and all that, I actually did find playing through the game, despite how intense it can get, I still found the game to be very fun. Not only because I felt like the gameplay was actually really good, especially compared to the other traditional style Resident Evil games. This one doesn't have the sort of the tank controls, as it was called, and the fixed like camera angles where you go to one side of the area, then the camera suddenly shifts, and your controls are like completely like mirrored, and all that. This is more of it's a traditional like sort of third-person shooter style of survival horror, which has been with the series since Resident Evil 4 when that first came out, and I feel like that sort of makes the game a whole lot better because. And it can also make things a lot more intense because, with the camera constantly focused on your character alone rather than, your surroundings, you don't really know what's going to suddenly pop up on the other side. Whereas in the other ones, because of the fixed camera angle, you could sort of, I guess, determine when a sort of, like, scary sort of event could happen. And overall, if I could find one particular thing to nitpick at, it's that your chances of actually dying or getting really, really injured in this game is very, very high, and I feel like it could be sort of done in an unfair way. For example, one of the main mechanics in the game is that when a zombie gets really close to you, they can like grab onto you and then just start biting at your neck, which of course doesn't instantly kill you as it normally would be. It just takes away some of your health, and there's not really much you can do about that unless you have one of the other sub-weapons, in your arsenal, like a grenade or one of the combat knives and all that. I feel like stuff, especially like the knife specifically, should be a sort of like a permanent item in your inventory, so that you almost always have you don't get into a situation where you're guaranteed to get hit. I feel like that can be, in a way, sort of unfair, especially when you play the game on like an easier difficulty. Like if you're trying to play this on the hardest difficulty possible, then sure. But for people just trying to get into the game, I feel like that would have been an easier way to lean players into playing the game. And also, I feel like one of the other things about easy mode that is good, and what I would sort of encourage you to do is the fact that whenever you're aiming at like a zombie, it automatically aims to like an area that you want to shoot at. I feel like that shouldn't be just restricted to like a sort of easy mode. I feel like that should just be like a normal game mechanic. And if you wanted to, you could just turn it off whenever you want to. But other than those two things, I do feel like this game was really, really fun. And if you do want to get into the survival horror genre but don't really know where to start, I would definitely recommend that you play this. It's about a year old now, so you can get it for rather cheap-esque if you try to get it pre-owned. But yeah, I really hope you all enjoyed me talking about this game. So once again, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and until next time, I'm Ben Contreras, and bye.